Good evening, everyone, and good morning to you, Dr. Alp. I will just introduce the session. The talk is on how dialogue serves social peace, evidence from surveys, statistical data, and brain scans. I was lucky enough to be in your session last year in the dialogue studies cohort, 2021-22 in January. And I'm just going to give a brief introduction of you for the benefit of everybody present here. Dr. Y. Alp Aslandogan is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Shared Values, a non-profit organization that promotes bringing together citizens of diverse backgrounds around shared values of humanity. Local partners of AfSV focus on interfaith and intercultural dialogue. Prior to his current position, Dr. Aslandogan served as the board president of the Institute of Interfaith Dialogue in Houston, Texas. Dr. Aslandogan is the co-editor of the Muslim Citizens of the Globalized World, Contributions of the Gulen Movement, published by the Institute of Interfaith Dialogue, and the co-author of The Messenger, Prophet Muhammad and His Life of Compassion, published by Blue Dome. He published columns in CNN, Huffington Post, and Fox News, and serves as a contributing editor for Fountain Magazine and on the board of scholars and practitioners of the Journal of Interreligious Dialogue. He holds a PhD in computer science. We welcome you, Dr. Alp, and please take over and enlighten the students. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, for seeing this as valuable. I hope it will be worth your time. And I also apologize for the last time there was a synchronization problem. So I apologize for my part in that. So today we'll talk about dialogue and civic engagement, and in particular, how they serve or they contribute to social peace in a society. I'm the director of Alliance for Shared Values, as was mentioned, and we have 7 partner organizations in US and Canada. And their goal is to bring Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, and humanists, atheists together for meaningful conversations. This happens sometimes directly in dialogue events and sometimes indirectly in social responsibility projects where people try to contribute to their society. And on a typical year, they bring together around 60,000 Americans and Canadians of different backgrounds. I have been in this role for the last 10 years. My background is actually in computer science. I still continue to teach on the side. So it's kind of an interesting combination. But I think as you advance in your life, you will see that at some point people begin to seek meaning, that you want to do something that has meaning for you. And sometimes technical subjects may not be satisfactory alone. So that's my story. All right, so I'd like to begin with my slides, if I may. There you go. And you can tell me if they are legible or if I should make them, if I should zoom in. All right, so every one of us, I see that you have a very diverse group of people. From last time, I remember people come from very different backgrounds and they live in different localities. They are in different careers. So I'm very glad to see that such a diverse group of people are interested in social peace and making a contribution, especially in a country like India with over 1 billion population. Sometimes you can get disheartened. As the countries get bigger, their problems get bigger, and you sometimes think, who am I? What is my significance? If I do something or if I don't do something, it doesn't mean much. You may get these thoughts, and I do get those thoughts sometimes. But there's an inspirational story from the story of Abraham, Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him. Not from the Quran, but from the folk tradition. So according to the story, when Abraham was put to fire, Later, of course, he was saved from fire, but at that moment, it was not clear that he would be saved. He was praying to God for being saved. There was a little bird who came and dropped a little bit of water on the fire. And as the bird was going away, Abraham said to the bird, you know that this little bit of water is not going to make a difference. And the bird said that, I know that, but I want the world to know that I'm on your side. So I think as individuals, I think it's our duty to do something that is meaningful to us and our heart approves. And it will have an impact in the larger scale only where there are enough people who have the same views, have the same values. So that is not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to do something ourselves. And when we do something, we may not be able to make a big impact on the society, but we are definitely building something in ourselves. So in that sense, everything that we do or every level of consciousness that we get into, that is progress for us, that is development for us, and that is meaningful. So in a sense, achieving the full potential of being a human. We are taking steps in that direction. So we should not just focus on the big problems in the big society, but what are we building in ourselves and around ourselves. In a society, we have different roles. I'm sure some of you are students, some of you are professionals. You have hobbies, so you are belong to a group as a hobbyist. You have a religion, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, etc. Some of you may be parents. We are all children, obviously. We are neighbors. We are professionals, and we are citizens. We have several roles. So in dialogue and civic engagement, these are the areas where we can engage in dialogue and civic engagement. We have our neighborhood as an area. We have our professional world as an area. We have our government officials and the civic leaders or religious leaders as an area. We have the hobby world or social responsibility world as an area. We have the interfaith, intercultural world. Now in Europe, you might have heard religious observation, especially church attendance, is very, very low. But that doesn't mean people became unreligious or irreligious. They are just satisfying their needs, spiritual needs, through different means. So interfaith or intercultural world is another area. Let's begin with a few definitions. And this definition is based on work that is done within the Hizmet movement. Hizmet movement is this education movement that started out in Turkey. I'm sure you heard about it. That was led by Muslim scholar Fethullah Gulen. And it became fairly large for Turkey with about 1 million participants because of the persecution within the last 5-10 years by the Turkish president. Now about 100,000 or so of the participants are outside of Turkey, but still about 900,000 remain in Turkey. In addition to education, the movement focuses on dialogue and humanitarian work, humanitarian relief. So there are organizations dedicated to these purposes, but education is the #1 focus. Now, so according to participants who study this topic, they define dialogue as such. A dialogue is any meaningful interaction or exchange among people of different ethnic, social, cultural, political, religious, ideological backgrounds through various kinds of conversations and activities without imposing their ideas, beliefs, or values upon others in an atmosphere of equality, tolerance, honesty, openness, sincerity, and courtesy. And this particular definition is based on a publication by the Journal of Dialogue Studies, which is published by Dialogue Society in England, that was started by Hizmet participants. So if you go to their site, Dialogue Society UK, you can actually get the original document. So this definition also tells us what dialogue is not. Dialogue is not an effort for conversation. It's not a debate to show that you are right and the other party is wrong. It is not a compromise from one's religion. It is not an effort to unify religions. Now, as I say these things, if you have been involved in interfaith dialogue at all, you might have seen that some people actually try to do these things, and it doesn't work. You know, if you try to use dialogue for conversion, it doesn't work. If you try to prove that the other party is wrong, it doesn't work. I mean, logically, in a debate, you may overtake the other party logically, but you don't convince them. You don't earn their hearts. It doesn't work. If you make a compromise from your own religion, then it doesn't work either, because now you're not authentic to yourself. And the efforts to unify religions historically also have failed. So trying to use or see dialogue as a venue for these, it doesn't work. So in Hizmet movement, we see dialogue as such. We don't see it as a venue for any of these. And examples of activities, I'm sure you're familiar with visiting each other's places of worship, getting an idea of their beliefs and worship practices, families eating together, guided conversations, structured conversations, luncheons, book clubs, meetings, panels, workshops. Trips are very valuable, because when you organize a trip to another locality, then people get to allocate a significant amount of time where they dedicate to this activity. And they are open. They are not busy with all the other work. So in our experience, domestic or international trips for cultural exchange have produced great understanding, mutual understanding. And finally, social responsibility projects, which is related to civic engagement, they also provide opportunities for dialogue. Let's now switch to civic engagement. Civic engagement, of course, is not completely separate from dialogue, but it has an intersection with dialogue, because dialogue happens during civic engagement. But civic engagement is more broad. In dialogue, you are usually representing a faith tradition, like you are there as a Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or Christian, or a cultural background, you know, Turkish, Indian, Tanzanian, Canadian, etc. But in civic engagement, you are there more as a citizen, as a neighbor, as a human being, sometimes as a professional, sometimes as a community member. So we have many identities, but the identities like these, citizen, neighbor, human, resident of a locality, so these come to the fore, professional. These come to the fore in civic engagement. In dialogue, religious or cultural identity comes to the fore. So civic engagement, according to, I'm going to share different definitions. There's not a single definition, as you can imagine. But these are the definitions, some of the definitions that are cited. The most cited, in my experience, definition is this one. Civic engagement is working to make a difference in the civic life of our communities and developing the combination of knowledge, skills, values, and motivation to make that difference. Promoting the quality of life in a community through both political and non-political processes. This definition, according to Thomas Ehrlich, published in the Civic Responsibility and Higher Education book. I'm not sure if I can, this is the book. So this is an often cited definition. Another definition by a researcher in the field, Dr. Mary Hilton, the process of connecting individuals in society with one another to share common interests and work for the common good. American Psychological Association defines it as individual and collective actions designed to identify and address issues of public concern. Okay, a more detailed definition gives examples of the kinds of activities that we consider under civic engagement. And this is according to Keeter and others. Keeter is a researcher, also worked for Pew Research, if you heard about that organization. Pew Research is one of the leading pollsters in the US and in the world. So in their publication, they define three kinds of civic activities, civic engagement activities. Civic activities, voluntary associations that promote the health and well-being of the community, such as membership in a fraternal organization, religious organization, clubs, professional associations, volunteering, charitable fundraising, community problem solving. In the political domain, efforts to shape social institutions through collective action, signing petitions, boycotting companies or organizations, protesting, expressing opinions to the media, lobbying efforts such as writing letters or emails, testifying, visits with policymakers. In America, I am a member of AARP, which is an organization for people aged 50 and above. And recently, there was a campaign about drug prices. In America, there is the Medicare system, which provides healthcare to people 65 and above. And until recently, this Medicare organization could not negotiate drug prices with medical companies. So AARP lobbied the Congress to pass the law so that Medicare can negotiate with the drug companies for lower drug prices. And it succeeded. The law passed both the House and the Senate. So now it is the law. And I made the contribution to that. I emailed my Congress people, my Senate members. I reached out to them. And in total, this organization collected millions of signatures, millions of emails, and hundreds of phone calls to contribute to passing of that law. It also limited the maximum a person needs to spend for insulin for people who are diabetic. The maximum they can spend under insurance for insulin was limited to $2,000 per year. So that was a big gain for American citizens of elder age and not enough means. So that's an example of being part of the political action. Electoral activities, all those activities aimed at influencing the outcomes of the electoral process, voting, campaigning, registering to other people to vote, or supporting candidates. So these are all considered civic engagement. Some of them are more political, some of them are more social. So sometimes you will see that they will, some researchers will separate this into two subtopics: social engagement and civic engagement. When they say civic engagement, they mean more political, but this is not always shared. This view is not always shared. The more common view is that under civic engagement, there is both social and political activities. Now, there is another definition which is more important for us today by a researcher who studied civic engagement in India. This is Dr. Ashutosh Varshney from Brown University, which is a very prestigious university in America. So he studied civic engagement both in India and other places, and he defines two types of engagement as such. One is associational or institutional. The other one is everyday. Under associational, people become members of business associations. So when I say people, for India, it would mean Hindus and Muslims. For America, it would mean Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Hindus and others. In Turkey, for instance, which is my background, it would mean the majority Sunni Muslims and the Alawites and the Christians and Jews, the leftists and the rightists. So that is the intention. People of different backgrounds become members of these associations. Reading clubs, film clubs, sports clubs, NGOs, trade unions, and political parties. And you can add examples to these from your own background. In the everyday civic engagement, he mentions as examples families from different communities visit each other. They eat together regularly, like once every month, once every week. They participate in the festivals of each other. They allow their children to play together. They play sports together and similar. So he gives these two categories of examples. Now, Varshney makes a distinction or makes an emphasis on the associational and institutional civic engagement, because he says that in every society, politicians are after votes. And sometimes they see polarization as a means to get more votes. So they antagonize groups against each other. And through that, they try to get more votes. So he says that associational civic engagement makes a community more resilient against polarization by politicians. Let me repeat that because it was very important for me. We cannot be naive. We should realize that there are people who benefit from polarization, antagonization. So he says that associational and institutional civic engagement makes a society more resilient against polarization by politicians and other political leaders. All right, a few other examples and definitions. According to youth.gov, which is a kind of a group of federal agencies that focus on the youth in America, they give these 4 subcategories of civic engagement. Civic action or participation in activities such as volunteering, service learning to help better the community. Civic commitment or duty, willingness to make positive contributions to society. Civic skills, ability to be involved in civil society, politics and democracy. And social cohesion, a sense of reciprocity, trust, and bonding to others. So in this talk, I'm emphasizing this particular dimension of civic engagement. Yet another list from Pew Research, when they studied the level of civic engagement in America, they looked at actions such as these: signing a petition, contacting a national, state, or local government official, working with fellow citizens to solve a problem in your community, attending a political meeting on local town or school affairs, contributing money to a campaign or a candidate, being an active member of a group that tries to influence public policy or government, etc. So here, there is more emphasis on the political actions, if you remember from our classification from before. Here is another example from Brookings Foundation. They give examples under the topic of building community, identifying a problem in your community and working with your neighbors to fix it, planting trees, sharing a toolkit with teachers in your community, volunteering to serve as an officer or member of a group in your community, visiting someone else's place of worship, keeping watch on children who play in the neighborhood, painting a mural, picking up trash, starting a book club, serving as a juror, collecting food, visiting a nursing home, donating blood, taking a first aid class, cleaning up local park, cleaning up local river or lake, starting a bowling league. Okay, helping others in an emergency. It goes so on, and I think you can imagine the kinds of examples that they're going to add here. Okay, this is Brookings Institution, the bucket list for involved citizens. This is the title, and I'm going to share this slide, so if you're interested, you can go back to this publication and see more examples. Okay. I'm going to give 2 examples from our locality. In New Jersey, there is or actually this is in America, it's called, there's an organization called Family Promise. This organization actually focuses on helping families who are homeless in America. In America, homelessness is an important problem. There are hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions, I don't know exactly, but definitely hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless. Many of these are due to psychological reasons, post-traumatic stress, or war veterans, but it's not limited to them. There are many other people who are homeless, and some of these are families. It could be 2 parents and a child, or multiple children. It could be a mom and children, a father and children. So Family Promise is trying to help families without home. So what they do is they bring together faith and social organizations to provide shelter and food to these people, and also give them skills to get a job. And our friends, ladies from the Turkish American Hizmet movement community in New Jersey participated in this program and provided hot meals to homeless families. So here's an example from one of their programs. And kind of a funny anecdote, the people who were benefiting from this center, so a church opened their basement for homeless families to stay at night. And the Turkish American ladies actually cooked meals for them, hot meals, not every day, one day of the week. So they said later that that day when the Turkish American ladies provided food was their favorite because they were cooking hot vegetable meals. So in America, you might be familiar, the cuisine has some popular items, and hot vegetable meals is not one of them. I mean, it is liked, but it is not always available. So the beneficiaries of this program, they loved the fact that these ladies were cooking hot vegetable meals for them. Okay, but this is a collaboration of Muslims, Christians, Jews, and other people, Hindus in America to help homeless families. And then one other program that you might have heard before is by Habitat for Humanity. This particular program is interfaith build. You know, Habitat for Humanity builds homes for people without the means to build a home or buy a home. In this particular program, they bring together people of different backgrounds to build homes for people in need. All right, so what are the goals of dialogue and civic engagement? You can view it from two angles: to prevent certain things and to facilitate certain things. To prevent or reduce or eliminate ignorance, fear, anger, hatred, enmity, discrimination, and violence. And in their place, put familiarity, true knowledge, empathy, acceptance, trust, harmony, and cooperation. Okay. So I have a little personal anecdote for this. Many years ago, when I came to the United States as a graduate student for my master's, I met with an Caucasian American friend in our lab. And later on, he was married and he had a family. At some point, they purchased a home. They have this tradition called housewarming party, where they invite friends to welcome everybody to their new home. And I went there, and his name was Chuck. Chuck introduced me to his friends. You know, this is Alp, he's from Turkey. And one of their friends, when they first saw me and heard Chuck, this is Alp from Turkey, he looked at my face like this, and I don't forget what he said because it was surprising, shocking for me too. He said, these are his words, as far as I can remember. I think I remember almost exactly. He said, "Oh yeah, you watch those movies and you think they cannot be all like that." This is what he said when he saw me, you know, out from Turkey. He said, "Oh yeah, you watch those movies and you think they cannot be all like that." So this was his first encounter from somebody from Turkey. So whatever he imagined, I was very different from that. That was surprising for him. So he had a prejudice. He had a stereotype about Turks. And that was broken because he actually met with a real person. And in studies in America, we know that the vast majority of Americans have never met a Muslim or a Hindu, you know, somebody outside of their tradition. So in dialogue and civic engagement, one of the first goals is to replace stereotypes and prejudices with true knowledge. You can actually ask the person, you know, what is your life like? What do you believe in? What do you practice? Why do you practice that? What does it mean to you? So you can do these things. All right. Another way of saying the same thing is this is the Pyramid of Hate that was published by Anti-Defamation League in America. This is an organization that fights especially anti-Semitism, but they also fight against other forms of prejudice and racism. They have this concept called Pyramid of Hate. It is not unique to them, but I think they have a good way of describing this. So it starts with bias, stereotyping, insensitive remarks, belittling jokes, non-inclusive language, justifying biases by seeking out like-minded people. The next stage is individual acts of prejudice, bullying, ridicule, name-calling, social avoidance, slurs, dehumanization. The next stage is discrimination, economic discrimination, employment discrimination, educational discrimination, political, housing, and segregation. Next stage is bias-motivated violence. At the individual level, murder, rape, assault, threats. At the community level, arson, terrorism, vandalism, desegregation. And at this final stage, it goes to genocide. So in dialogue and civic engagement, we want to reverse this pyramid. In place of the bias, we want to put familiarity. In place of actions, out of bias, we want to put understanding. In the place of discrimination, we want to put empathy and acceptance. And in place of violence and genocide, we want to put trust and collaboration. All right, so these are all lofty goals, but how do we know that dialogue and civic engagement actually helps achieve these goals? Do they make a contribution? Do dialogue and civic engagement contribute to social peace? Now, in last year's conversation, there was an interesting question and reminder, the argument or the goal in this presentation is not to say that dialogue and civic engagement is the most important factor in social peace. That's not our argument. One of the participants last year rightfully suggested that social justice and mechanisms for social justice is more important for social peace. And I completely agree with that. You know, social justice has to be there for social peace. If there is great economic discrimination, if there is great political polarization, if there is great racial or religious polarization, that will lead to social injustice, and there will not be peace. So dialogue and peace, civic engagement alone cannot achieve all of those. But dialogue and civic engagement contributes to everything. For political, economic justice, people need to understand how others live, how others feel. And dialogue and civic engagement hopefully helps in empathy building. So dialogue and civic engagement, we are not saying that it is the most important thing for social peace. We are saying that it contributes to social peace, along with many other important efforts. So I wanted to make that clear this year at the beginning. So I will share some evidence that it actually works. It contributes to social peace from 3 different domains: from surveys, from social science research, and from biological, neurological research. Okay, here are some observations by social scientists. Through collective action, people from different backgrounds who might not normally associate with one another come together for a common purpose. As a result, civic engagement promotes an understanding of the connection between individual self-interest and the common good. This is by Dr. Mary Hilton. And according to nonprofit votes, they report that voters experience increased social connections, increased personal agency, and perhaps as a result, better health and mental health outcomes. According to researchers, again, political activism in particular correlates to higher reported life satisfaction, less stress, and greater overall well-being. And at the university level, civically engaged students have higher rates of satisfaction with college, higher GPAs, and higher retention rates. They are also more likely to complete degrees than their less engaged peers. Okay, let's now have a look at concrete examples. This is a survey example. In America, a foundation called One Nation Foundation was established by a Christian businessman by the name of George Russell. After 9/11, George Russell thought, after seeing the prejudice and the enmity toward Muslims in America, he thought this. He said that in Europe, the different branches of Christianity fought each other for 100 years. You know, there is a famous 100-year war. There is a 30-year war in European history. He said that, you know, I hope that this doesn't happen in America. You know, I don't want to see a 100-year war between Muslims and Christians in America or around the world. So I should do something about it. So he set aside, millions of dollars and established One Nation Foundation, and its purpose is to improve the image of Muslims in America. And he appointed Mr. Henry Izumizaki, a Japanese American, as its head, and they worked for 4 years in America to make a contribution. So they trained television anchors about Islam. They prepared a website for Hollywood film producers to learn about Islam. They gave education to Muslim imams and preachers for media interviews. They organized educational workshops for government agencies. They helped produce documentaries about Islam and interfaith relations. But in 2010, when there was a poll about image of Islam, Muslims in America, they were very disheartened. They saw that Muslims rated very low in America in terms of perception. So what they asked, this is again Pew Research, they asked people, Americans, to rate religions according to how warm they feel toward that religion. Okay, so 100 is the warmest and 0 would be the coldest. And Islam rated at 40, degree of 40, atheists 41, Mormons 48, Hindus 50, Buddhists 53, evangelical Christians, Catholics, and Jews rated about 60%. So you can also see that even for the most popular religions in America, there is a significant population that don't feel warm toward those religions. Okay, when they broke this down according to political orientation, among the Democrats, the Mormons scored lowest, 44%, atheists 46%, Muslims 47%, Christians 53%, evangelical, Hindus 54%, Buddhists 57%, Catholics 61%, Jews 62%. According to Republicans, Muslims 33%, atheists 34%, Hindus 47%, Buddhists 49%. So this is, when they saw this, they thought that their efforts until that time did not make a big difference. So they actually wanted to see what makes a difference, what really changes people's opinions. And they noticed another study. In this study, people were asked, again, the same thing, how do you rate different religions? But they were also asked, do you know somebody from that group? So this is what is interesting for us. When people know somebody from another group as a neighbor, as a colleague, as a member in an association, their rating of that group is on the average 10 points higher. So here, for Jews, if they know from a group, from that group, it is 69% or 69, as opposed to 63 on average. For Catholics, it goes up 2%. For evangelicals, it goes up 4% or 4 points. For Buddhists, it goes up actually 17 points. For Hindus, it goes 13 points. For Mormons, 5 points. For atheists, 9 points. For Muslims, 9 points. Okay, so on average, about 10% increase in how people feel warmer to members of a religion. So they saw that direct interaction, people-to-people connection is something actually that makes a difference. So from that point on, from 2010 on, this foundation stopped what they were doing. They reallocated their funds, remaining funds, to community engagement projects. They founded in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in New York, projects that bring together people with different backgrounds together. So Pew Research concludes that people who say that they personally know someone from a religious group express warmer views of that groups. And here is another example from 2019. So this didn't change. You see that people who know somebody from another religion, on the average, they are 9% warmer, or a little less, or a little more. And Dr. Ingrid Mattson, who is a Canadian Muslim, who was once the chair of ISNA, the largest Muslim organization in America, Islamic Society of North America, she said that Americans, when they are asked, they don't want to have a Muslim as a neighbor. But Americans with a Muslim neighbor have the highest ratings for Muslims. So they don't want a Muslim neighbor, but they do have when they do have a Muslim neighbor, their image of Islam is significantly improved. So this again shows the fact that person-to-person connection works to improve perception of other religions. Now let's switch to the India study that I mentioned by Dr. Ashutosh Varshney. If you're interested in this study, he published this in the form of a book, and I'm sure he published articles after this book. And it is entitled Ethnic Conflict and Civic Life, Hindus and Muslims in India. Okay. So what he observed, and I'm going to share only a very small portion of this study. What they did was they studied inter-ethnic or inter-religious violence in different Indian cities, and they tabulated this over a period of nearly 50 years, from 1950 to 1995. And they normalized this over the population. For those of you who are familiar with statistical topics, if you go with the absolute numbers, you don't get the true picture. You have to know the number of violence cases per million population or per 100,000. So you have to normalize them. You have to standardize them. Okay, you cannot just look at the absolute numbers. So what you see here is actually the number of deaths per 1 million population in urban populations in India, in riots with 1 or more deaths. Okay, so they are normalized according to population. The size of the city doesn't matter. or size of the state doesn't matter. So look at the difference between Punjab, Haryana, please excuse my pronunciation, and Gujarat and Bihar and Maharashtra here. There is a very significant difference between different localities. So Ashutosh Varshney and his team wanted to identify why is this happening? Why is there so big difference in terms of interethnic violence and deaths between these localities? And they came to the conclusion after studying the different factors is that civic engagement makes a difference. In places where Muslims and Hindus are better civically engaged, there is much less violence. When there is not sufficient engagement between Hindus and Muslims, there is much more violence. Okay, both associational and everyday forms of civic engagement, if robust, promote peace. Contrariwise, the absence of associational and everyday engagement or weakness opens up space for ethnic violence. And associational forms of engagement are more resistant to efforts to polarize people. Okay, so both of the types of civic engagement that I mentioned before, I shared with you from Ashutosh Varshney's work. So both of these forms of engagement help with peace, but when there is efforts, intentional efforts for polarization, then the associational engagements are more resilient. Okay, so that was his conclusion from his study, that the difference between these cities and states, regions in terms of interethnic violence is the two forms of civic engagement. More engagement, less violence, less engagement, more violence. So this is an example from the social science research, and there is research in other geographies, other places, but in the interest of time, I'm not sharing those. And finally, the third piece of evidence comes from neurological research. There's an article that is in the references section of this presentation. So if you're interested, you can go and study. That article is actually comes from the business world, but its references come from different kinds of social science research and neurological, biological research. So in summary, what they are saying here is that our brains are constantly gauging people for whether they are friends and foes, and the default bias of the brain is for foe or enemy. Anyone perceived different from friends or what we see as in-group triggers a threat response. We have less empathy for others versus people who we see as our in-group. Our brains are predisposed to fear those who are different. Some fear conditioning is learned through personal experience, but most of it through social learning, which wires our brains, but rewiring is possible. For rewiring, we need reframing, and personal interaction with people from other groups can be a powerful rewiring experience. Okay, and this is all backed up by MRI scans, actual scans of the brain. So let me go through some of these points in more detail. Okay, human brain has 5 distinctive social needs: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Our brains perceive a threat to any of those 5 social needs. Okay, and then our brain actually prepares us for defense. Okay. Perceived threats in social environment activate the same automated response as the physical threats. Anyone perceived to be different from those our brain perceives as friends or in-group automatically triggers a threat response. Okay, this is seen in the MRI scans of people. And then we have stronger empathy for whom we see as friends or in-group as opposed to others. So in human brain, we have what is called mirror neurons, which allows us to feel the feelings of people that we observe. Okay, this is empathy. So the mirror neurons helps us develop empathy for people that we observe, but we don't feel the same empathy for different people. Okay, this is what the research is showing. Sorry, I'm just reorganizing my screen here. Yeah, we feel more empathy toward in-group. So that means that we are less sensitive to the suffering of people whom we see as different from our group. Okay, so in this particular study, there were multiple studies, but they asked people to operate a knob where somebody else is giving some level of pain. And they noticed that when the people who is controlling the knob sees the other person as different, they are willing to give them much more pain. Okay, it's an alarming study, but it is reality. It has been observed in multiple circumstances. And this otherness can be just not only racial or religious, but it can be simply something like sympathizer for another soccer team, for another rugby team, for another political party. So it can happen in different boundaries. Okay, and many of these in-group and out-group perceptions are socially learned, culturally learned. Some of it is biological. At birth, we have a tendency to fear people who are different from us. Even in the 2-year-olds, for instance, they observe that when they see somebody who is different from them, they tend to fear. So biologically, probably that makes sense that they should stick with people who are like them as children, right? So they should be cautious about people who look different. So biologically, for children, that makes sense. But this is only a small portion of the bias. When people grow up, they actually learn many of their biases socially. Okay, so the bad news here is that negative racial stereotyping can happen in many domains, and it can sometimes happen even in the members of the same race, same social group, same religious group. And the good news is that if it is learned, that means it can be unlearned. Right? And fear is the driving force for racism or for violence driven by fear. It happens through social learning we mentioned. And I have an anecdote about this. So the images, bad images, negative images about the group condition our brain. Okay, for most of us, our perception of a group comes from these images that we see. In India, it is possible that if you live in an inter-ethnic neighborhood or in a city, you might actually see inter-ethnic violence. But for most people, it doesn't happen that way. They see images of people attacking each other, or they see people with one group attacking another group, right? And unfortunately, in media, the negative news are amplified. So there is real violence there. There is real oppression, persecution going on in the world, all around the world. We know this. But our perception of how much violence is ongoing, that is not proportional to reality. Okay, we usually get a much more negative picture of reality through news media. And this is scientifically shown that the news media actually portrays the events around the world with a very significant negativity bias. So one day when I met with one of the producers of Good Morning America on one of the popular American channels, ABC, there's this Good Morning America program, which is a very popular program. And I had a chance to talk with one of the producers, and I asked him, why is this negativity in the news, in the media programs? You tend to report much more negative news than positive news. We know in our experience that in life, that's not the case. Okay, so most Hindus and Muslims are not fighting. Yeah, they are fighting in some places. They fight from time to time, but most of the time, most of Hindus and Muslims are not fighting. Most Muslims and most Christians are not fighting. But when you ask a Christian about their image of Islam, probably violence is in the top of their heads about the image of Islam. And if you go to another locality, go to Africa, there's tribal violence there. If you ask different tribes, they might have the same perception. But most of the time, most of those groups are not fighting each other, with the exception of war times. So I asked him, why is this negativity in the news? And this is literally what he said. He said, negative news pay our bills. He said, negative news pay our bills. So what he's saying in essence is that when we publish negative things about threats, catastrophes, conflicts, violence, we get more viewers, we get better ratings, therefore we get more advertisement. So they are responding simply to human psychology. Okay. So we should not blame media. They are responding to human psychology. What we need is more conscious viewers who will choose not to get their information about other groups through news media. And they will expose themselves less to news media. So the good news here is that rewiring is possible. So despite the social learning that we get through media, it is possible to rewire our brains. And the researchers are saying that for rewiring, we need reframing. The most important elements or tools for reframing is personal interaction. Personal interaction with people from different groups can be a powerful rewiring experience. So what they did is they actually studied the images, the brains of people when they have personal interaction with people from other groups, and they see that their threat response to these other groups actually diminished. So they literally see the brain activity, the threat response to this other group when they are exposed to the images of this other group, it is less, it is diminished when they have personal interaction with other groups. So we can rewire our human brains by facilitating safe connections among people, and it is seen, this is observed biologically through brain scanning, brain images. Okay. One note before I finish and open up for your questions, we should not be naive. We should realize that there are people and there are factors and circumstances that feed fear, that feed stereotyping, conflicts, polarization, and they benefit from it materially. So we should be cognizant of this. We should also be cognizant of the fact that there are major factors that fuel oppression and conflict. It is not just the lack of knowledge, but it is one factor. And so dialogue and civic engagement are not the silver bullet. So this is a term in English, American English. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but silver bullet is like something that will solve all the problems. Okay, with one bullet, you will kill the problem. So it is not the silver bullet. It should be one component of a more holistic approach. As far as we are concerned, the evidence from surveys, the evidence from social science research, the evidence from neurological research, they all point out that when we have meaningful personal interaction among people, dialogue and civic engagement, their perception of each other is improved. Their negative stereotypes are eliminated. So, if this perception and stereotyping is not based on real experience, then we have a hope to improve interracial, interethnic, interreligious relations in the world. There will still be polarizing politicians. There will still be social injustice and economic injustice. We should help to make those situations better as well. But dialogue and civic engagement will also contribute to the solutions of those problems. When people understand each other better, they will try to, hopefully, they will try to work together an economic solution. They will try to work together for a better political solution. They will realize that these political actors are not serving us. They are not serving the future of our country. So we should look for and nurture and develop political actors who are more for inclusion. So dialogue and civic engagement, while they may not be the solution to economic injustice or political polarization directly, they may be indirect contributors to other problems as well. So with that, I conclude and I open up for your questions. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Alp. This was a very enlightening session. I'm sure all of our participants really enjoyed it. Everyone, you can just raise your hands and if you have questions.
I'm seeing one comment in the chat. Shall I start with that?
Yes, sure.
So sometimes politicians will raise issues that may not be real. So that's exactly what I mentioned. There are people who benefit from polarization. This is a common tactic because fear is an important psychological dynamic for humans. Okay, we cannot ignore that. Fear is a very important motivator. Okay, anything that is emotional is an important motivator. Let me give an example from a different study, a positive one. So in Africa, we know that there is hunger in different places, and there are efforts to address this hunger, and there are fundraising campaigns. So researchers in America conducted a study where they shared information about hunger in Africa with potential donors. They said in Africa, there are, I don't know, like 200, 500,000 children who wake up hungry every day. And then they gave more information about that, and they asked for donations to support campaigns in Africa. And then in another group, they showed the picture of a girl. Let's call her Aisha or Kulsum or Shruti. I'm picking up examples from the audience. And they told her story. It was a real story. And they said there are 500,000 other children like her. So in this campaign, they raised much more funds, okay? Because people actually felt a personal connection. They felt her pain, and they were able to contribute more. So this happens on the opposite side in terms of fear, that politicians will raise issues that are not real. Politicians will lie sometimes, or they may, sometimes they share facts, but they omit other relevant facts. Sometimes omission is a bigger lie. Sometimes they will lie with statistics. They will do this to make people fear and vote for them. So we should be cognizant of this. And in some countries, I don't know if there's one in India, there are fact checkers. So when politicians lie, they actually expose them. So one form of civic engagement can be being a part of a fact checker, exposer organization. There are so many different things that can be done, and politicians are not the only ones. There are certain religious leaders, who benefit from fear. There are people who material benefit from fear. So we should be cognizant of those, definitely. Prage, you can give the microphone to
yes,
people.
Kulsum, you can go first, and then Shruti.
All right. Hello. I just wanted to ask, you spoke so much about the importance of dialogue in social change and bringing about people together. But often I find, and this is from me, especially as somebody who grew up in a small town, there are a lot of people here who come from very sheltered homes, and they're very sheltered in their community in general. So how do you kind of begin dialogue with people who, they haven't really learned to look outside their own community? Like, how do you begin with that?
Yeah, that happens everywhere. And we call this the phenomenon of usual suspects versus the others. So in dialogue, in my experience in America, in interfaith dialogue, the people who engage in dialogue are usually the same people. But we want to go to a place where people don't meet with each other, and they don't want to meet with other people. They don't want to meet with people who are different, and they may be afraid, they may be angry. So that's a challenge. For this, you have to think outside of the box. You have to think as a human first. Can I find an opportunity for a human-to-human interaction, and don't think of it as interfaith or inter-ethnic dialogue. Think of it as just the engagement of people who come from different backgrounds. And can I be innovative? Can I find a way just to find a way to share to some experience with this person? Professional organization is an excellent way for this, but in a small town that may not be available. There may not be a branch of a professional organization. So really, it is out-of-box thinking. But I'm going to give you one example from a faith-based organization in Houston, where I lived for some time. There's a dialogue organization, Institute for Interfaith Dialogue, and our friends there, they have organized classes for people of different religions to learn about each other. And every year, they take this class to different places of worship. They take them to a temple, in the temple, they take them to a synagogue, they take them to different churches. And one of the places that they go is an evangelical church. And people in this church are not interested in dialogue. They don't want to visit a mosque. They don't want to interact with Muslims, but they want to evangelize Muslims. They want to turn them into Christians, right? So nevertheless, this group, class students and our organizers from Institute for Interfaith Dialogue, they take this group of students every year to this church, and they say, please tell us about your version of Christianity. And the pastors there tell about their understanding of Christianity and what they do in the church, with an intention to attract some people to their church. So they do this year after year. You know, one year, the people at the church, they talk to each other, and we learned this later. They said, you know, this Muslim group is coming here and bringing people every year. We have not once visited their mosque. Why don't we go and also visit them? So they came. After 3 years, I think, they came to visit and learn about Islam. They did not become Muslims, but they learned about Islam, their beliefs and practices. So they hopefully broke some of the stereotypes. So sometimes it may take a long time. Maybe you will just engage with a person as a human, as a neighbor for some time without mentioning anything about your background. And then they will observe, because when people come together, they observe. And then if they see something valuable in you, they will be interested, and they will you know, begin to change their views. But it is a challenge, because some people are really, you know, they have very negative views about others who are different. One of our friends in Texas, again, in Dallas, he was visiting different churches for starting dialogue activities. And one of the churches, you know, he knocked on the door, he met with the pastor. This is what the pastor told him. If you don't believe like me, you are destined for hell, and I don't need to speak with you. If you don't believe like me, you are destined for hell, and I don't need to speak with you. So, you know, such responses are possible. We should be prepared for these. And one of our friends, who is a colleague, Dr. Jill Carroll, says this: you may believe that somebody else is going to hell, but let's not turn this world into hell. Let's keep this, let's improve this world. Whatever you believe about me for the hereafter. Okay, sorry, it was a long response.
Shruti, you can go next.
So hi, sir. My question is, like, you mentioned how dialogue and civic engagement on like a personal level has like phenomenal results. And that is true, because once you start to talk to people, you understand where they're coming from and everything. But sir, I guess in a country like India compared to America, which is very, very diverse, right? India, many of the people, a majority of the people will never, you know, talk to someone of another religion. But still we have a very considerable population which belongs to other groups, right? So how can we have dialogue and civic engagement on a macro level? Like, because you mentioned George Russell, the One Nation Foundation, and he tried to do it on a macro level, but wasn't able to achieve that. So what would you suggest with that?
So, you know, when we say macro level, what we mean is that we want to have impact on the larger scale for the larger population. But, you know, nobody is able to do something individually, right? Even things that happen at the macro level, they happen through the participation of a large number of people. So what the One Nation Foundation focused in the last few years of their work is to support community engagement projects at the local level. And they succeeded in doing this, supporting such projects in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in New York. And at the end, probably they contributed to meeting tens of thousands of Americans with each other in a meaningful way. So the organizational and associational forms of civic engagement is the most valuable tool for macro level engagement, because these associations and organizations are everywhere. And when we facilitate the engagement of the minorities in these organizations, that has a potential to serve at the macro level. Now, I know that in India, there are certain geographies but there are literally no or very few Muslims, like 99% are Hindu. So for those geographies, again, you may need to think out of the box. Okay? Is it possible to bring Muslims temporarily, or other minority faiths there temporarily to engage in activities, or maybe take Hindus to other places where they can engage with members of other faiths or ethnicities. Therefore, associational form of engagement has the potential to have an impact at the macro level. But for this, there is a lot of work to do. We started encouraging and facilitating associational participation within Hizmet movement in America. And this is a group which is open to dialogue. But the majority of the Muslims are not that way. And even within Hizmet movement, we are facing difficulty. When we reach the participants in the movement and tell them about this, sometimes you can see that they are feeling, okay, why do I need to become a member of an organization? I'm doing fine so far. I don't need to be a member of, let's say, engineering society or a business council, chamber of commerce, or something like that. I'm doing fine without that. So we're trying to give them a sense that, first of all, this is a responsibility, that you should represent yourself in this environment to improve social peace. Secondly, you will probably benefit from it. You will probably find new connections, networking opportunities, you will learn things, you will personally benefit from it. So it is a challenge to push people to go to a place where they would not normally go. But associational civic engagement is definitely something that can be done across the country. Again, we cannot do much individually, but we can be part of a bigger picture, and hopefully we will give inspiration to others.
Arfat, you can go next.
Hello, I'm Arfat, and I'm doing my PhD at Jawaharlal Nehru University. And my question is that how can we change the perception of the people? I'm at the university. I'm here from last 5 years, and it's okay. I have many friends from other faiths, but when I'm traveling around Delhi, I can't say I'm a Kashmiri, because if I'm saying I'm a Kashmiri and a Muslim, many questions are being posed. And if I say I'm an Afghani and I'm a Tajik from Central Asia, they will appreciate it. They will say, "Oh my God, welcome India. You love the country."
Yeah.
So
I think,
how can we change the perception?
Yeah. So basically, this talk was about that. Engaging in different forms of dialogue, engaging in different forms of civic engagement, we are able to. The research shows that people's perceptions change, but we should set our aims at a modest level. We should be humble about our aims. I cannot change the perceptions of 10,000 people, but I can change the perceptions of 10 people, 20 people, 30 people. If I'm in a certain position, I might be able to change the perceptions of 1,000 people, but probably not more than that. But there is the potential of chain reaction, right? If I'm able to change the perceptions of 10 people profoundly, those 10 people might be able to change the perceptions of 100 people. So it has the potential for a chain reaction. If we set our goals too high, oh God, I'm never going to see a day when Muslims and Hindus are living in complete peace in India. Probably that's not going to happen. There will still be violence between Hindus and Muslims in India as long as we live. But can we reduce it? Can we have some cities, some localities where there's no violence? Is that not success? So we should not set too high of a goal for us. Otherwise, we are sure to fail. We should set a more modest goal. So, you're all familiar with Mother Teresa's words, right? I cannot do big things. We cannot do big things. We can do little things with passion, with great passion.
Reshmi?
Sorry. I wanted to share this anecdote that I forgot. So when I came to America, I was doing research at this lab as a graduate student. And up until that time, I never met a Korean person, right? So a Korean person joined the group temporarily. And he was not very courteous. He was not very sensitive. He was sometimes rude or sounded like rude or behaved like rude. And I thought, how rude are these Korean people? And I met one Korean. Okay, this is the human brain. It generalizes from one example. If there are two, it will generalize from two examples. But if there are not two, it will generalize from one example. Then I met another Korean person. He was rude like him. I was certain that all Korean people are rude. Then we moved to Texas. I got my first job as a professor, and we met with a Korean family, and they were the most courteous family I have ever met. So now I'm thinking most Koreans are rude, but there are some who are not, right? And then I met another one who was courteous. Oh, maybe some of them are rude, some of them are not courteous, right? So this is how human brain works. Okay, so if the other person have met one Muslim or two Muslims, or they only saw images in the TV, that's what shapes their perception, right? So in this domain, the social psychology experts tell us this. This is important that I didn't mention, but you might want to make a note of this. The most important factor in shaping a perception of a group. Why are we interested in perception? Because perceptions often shape behavior, may lead to violence or collaboration, right? The most important factor that affects perception is personal experience. If I'm interacting with people, that is my strongest dynamic. The second aspect, I'm going to leave it open now. The third aspect is through media, through reading, through TVs, movies, etc. Right? So we know that in news media, they are likely to get a negative picture of the other. If you're a Muslim, you're going to get a negative picture of the Hindu. If you're a Hindu, you'll get a negative picture of the Muslim. So, and we are not able to personally interact with a lot of people. So what is the third option? The third option is the reference of a respected person. It's a trusted third party. The trusted third party is actually stronger in influencing perception than the media. So in addition to civic engagement and dialogue, where we facilitate one-on-one interaction, one other thing we can do is to reach out to influentials and get their support, encourage them, support them, influentials who are inclusive. When they make a small gesture, influentials, it is likely to affect the perceptions of people. Let me give an example from Turkey, where Mr. Sheikh Gulen, Fethullah Gulen, led efforts for interfaith dialogue in the 90s. And in Turkey, the majority is Muslim, 99.9% are Muslim, 95% is Sunni Muslim. There's only 35% Alevi Muslim, and then less than 1% Christian Jew others, right? So Sheikh Gulen invited the leaders of the Jewish community, the Orthodox Christian, Greek Orthodox community, and the Armenian community for interfaith events. He shook hands with them, he embraced them. And one of their leaders said this later on. He said that, some years ago, we are talking about 90s. He said that some years ago from now, nobody would look at us. Nobody would invite us to anything. Nobody would even look at us. We was like invisible. Right now, during Ramadan, I am getting so many invitations for dinners, I don't have time to attend to all of them. Okay, so one influential, Sheikh Gulen, made a big difference in the society. Unfortunately, after that, when he moved to America, the situation got worse. But my point is that if you're not able to personally interact with others, then we should try to reach out to influentials and encourage them to make small gestures. Okay, influentials also have to consider their own audience. They cannot do radical things or they will lose the audience, but they can make small adjustments which are very significant.
Okay, thank you. Reshmi?
Thank you so much, Professor. I think partially you have addressed some of my queries because it was like hell long back. So, but very quickly, there are a couple of thoughts which are coming to my mind. One is that the inception of dialogue would come from a position, if we can, from a position of power. Is it so? The inception of dialogue. So who takes the initiative? Is it coming from the position of power that I am better than the other? So this query leads to the idea of ethnocentrism, where I'm thinking that if I initiate the dialogue of peace, I'm taking a moral position. Am I? These are the questions. These are not statements. And the third one that you have already discussed is about the associations. So if the inception is from the position of power, and even if it is not, it can be assumed as coming from a position of power. The example that you're cited about this study where the interaction happened between, there was a Muslim neighbor and people who don't want, they don't want another neighbor from another religion, but if they are there, then they find them better congenial. I would have been also interested to know, what would Muslims or any other religion, why would they actually ghettoize themselves, or would want to be in a more liberal neighborhood? So, there are certain answers, but I would like to hear from you.
So why would they want to be in a diverse neighborhood?
Yes.
Is that your question?
Okay. Yes. Not in the sense that why isn't it coming so naturally to them that they would seek a neighborhood which is, diverse. Mm-hmm. It doesn't come naturally to them either. So
okay. Yeah, exactly. So for the first part, I might have missed a certain part. You can remind me later. But the motivation or inception or perspective on dialogue, when you start dialogue, when you initiate dialogue, is very important. If it is coming from a position or perspective of superiority, it is likely not to succeed. It has to come from a position of modesty, humility, and also duty. It is a duty because in the lack of dialogue, we know what happens, right? In the lack of dialogue, in the lack of empathy, we know what happens. There is violence, polarization, and injustice. So if you are a citizen, if you are a neighbor, that means we have a portion of that collective responsibility. A portion of that is that falls onto our shoulders. So I should do that because it is my responsibility. And I should do that because I should believe that as a human being, I have something to learn from everybody. Every human being has an opportunity to learn from some others. If somebody is not of this opinion that, okay, I'm fine, I don't have anything to learn from a Hindu, from a Christian, my religion is already superior, I'm destined for paradise, I'm in good shape, that is a big problem by itself that should probably be addressed by the religious teachers. Okay, first you need to learn humility. That should be the basis of everything. And it is actually a major teaching in every major religion, humility. In the Islamic tradition, we often cite this example of a famous Sufi master, who was worshiping day and night. And one day he hears this voice, says that, I don't remember his name now. Some of you might remember. Maybe Bayazid Baghdadi, I don't know. Let's say Bayazid. Oh, Bayazid. Since you're worshiping so much day and night, fasting and night prayers, don't think that you're doing something significant, because God's treasury is full of worship. God has billions of servants who are worshiping him. So you're not making a big contribution to that pool or ocean. Approach God with humility. Approach God with humility. So in dialogue, this is absolutely very important. Everybody should believe that I have something to learn from the other, even if I believe that my religion is superior. Obviously, if you belong to a religion, you think that it's a better religion, that's perfectly fine. But as a person, I have a lot to learn. And these other people who belong to different religions, they are creations of God. And as such, they are mirrors. This is Muslim belief. I'm now sharing my Muslim belief that every human being is a mirror of God's attributes in different ways. So I have things to learn from them. I don't know their hearts. In their hearts, they may be purer than me. Outwardly, they may belong to a different religion, but in their hearts, I don't know what's going on there, and I should not be their judge. Therefore, humility is very important and duty is very important. And I'm sure you can add other healthy motives to this, but that's absolutely right. You're absolutely right that it should not come from a position of superiority. And to wake up people to this, sometimes facilitators organize workshops. They ask people, what hidden assumptions you have that is affecting your actions. Question. And then people, raise certain things, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, I have this assumption too. So people should be woken up. Now, living in a neighborhood with people different from you, that is not natural, as you said. So I'm going to your second part. Again, we come back to the responsibility and duty. This is something to integrate, not to stay only within your cohort. This is something, it's an obligation for us. It doesn't mean that you live a Muslim neighborhood completely and you go into a 100% or 90% Hindu neighborhood or vice versa. That doesn't mean that. But what are you doing in your life? Okay, what are you doing in your life? It may not be in the form of moving to a different location, but what are you doing in your life, right? So maybe you can encourage a different person to come become your neighbor. When there is a home for sale in your neighborhood, you can encourage others, or you can ask for a neighborhood where there is some diversity. There is something you can do in that domain, but that's not the only domain. There's a professional domain, there's the social domain, there is the parent domain, there is the hobby domain, there is this domain, that domain. There are so many things that can be done. It doesn't have to be through a neighborhood.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. There are also questions in the chat. I'm not sure how we should,
Yeah, we'll go with the questions with the last person who's raised hand, and then we'll go back to the chat.
Maybe we can switch, because I don't want people who type into the chat to feel, they have a disadvantage.
Okay, if you wish that, then I think we'll go with Muhammad Alamullah. He had a comment. Alamullah, would you want to unmute and ask? Muhammad Alamullah, are you there?
Okay, I can read for him.
Yes.
That's okay. He says there are so many problems in the world. We all are so restless. For example, you talked about fear. How can we deal with them, and how can we, a common man with nothing in our hands, deal with it? What can be done to eliminate negative attitudes? So again, we are coming back to the question of what is our goal? What can we achieve? This is a matter of your devotion, your passion, and your resilience, your consistency. Okay. Let me give you an example from my background that I'm familiar with, right? So the originator of this movement, Hizmet movement, Sheikh Gulen, in 1958, he was a single preacher with no audience in the city of Edirne in Turkey. And in 1966, he moved to Izmir. He was appointed as a preacher in the city of Izmir. And he probably had, I don't know, 5 friends, 10 friends. And then he began preaching, and he was preaching for safe education for the kids, for dialogue in Turkish society, because in Turkish society, the left and the right was fighting at the time. They were literally killing each other. Thousands of youth died during that time. There were gunfights, actually. The leftist sympathizers of the Soviet Union and the rightist nationalists mostly, they are not necessarily sympathetic to America, but they were nationalists basically, and they were quasi-religious. They were believers at least, and the left was mostly either atheist or agnostic, something like that. So it is economic, political. It's a mixture, but there was a real polarization, street fights, gunfights. Many people died. And if you lived at that time, if you looked at the street, you would get disheartened. Nothing can be done. But what Sheikh Gulen did was, in the mosque and outside of the mosque, in the mosque, he began preaching, we need to do something about youth, about our youth. We need to teach them that difference doesn't mean fighting. We can learn to live with differences. Just because you have a different economic model in mind doesn't mean we have to fight each other. And they started dormitories. People invested money, started dormitories, started schools, started college prep courses. Others learned from them, they started other schools. And it came to a point that they reached hundreds of thousands of youth. And the movement itself became over 1 million participants in a country of 80 million, 75 million. Okay, that is significant. So it's like, about more than 1% or about 1% of the population. That's significant, but it started with one person. Now, we are not sheikhs, we are not, gurus or, influential preachers. We cannot do that. But depending on our passion, on our commitment and our consistency, resilience, we might be able to reach out to 10 people, 20 people. God is not going to ask, Muhammad, why did you not influence 100,000 people? That's not going to be the question you will be asked. Did you do what you are capable of, right? So I think, again, we should be consistent, and we should realize that this is not something that we are doing. The hearts are in the hands of God. We are just doing our work. The hearts are in the hands of God. Hearts are not in our hands. There's also something else that I wanted to mention. It's important. I don't want to forget it. Sorry, Imran. In the world, we have quite a few categorizations and labels, right? So in this audience now, we have Muslims, Hindus. I'm not sure if we have any other members of other religions. We have people like me of Turkish background and Indian background, and possibly from other countries as well, other ethnic backgrounds. So what are these? These are not nothing, but they are essentially labels. Turkish is a label, Muslim is a label, Hindu is a label. Behind that label is a human being. So if you imagine the world, if you make a world map, political world map, you will have boundaries and colors. Okay, India will be a color, Pakistan will be a color. There's a boundary. There is the Afghanistan, another color. There's a boundary. China, a different color. There's a boundary. America, Canada. If you make a religious world map, you will have majority. If you make the religious world map based on the majority religion, you will have colors and boundaries. But if you make a world map of people who believe in humanity, the fraternity of humanity, human family, who believe in hope for humanity, who believe in doing our best to be inclusive and strive for the common good, versus people who are interested in self-interest only or group interest, and who see others as enemies only, not human beings, but just enemies. So consider these two groups of people and plot them in the world. What do you get? You don't get single colors or boundaries. You get a black and white map all around the world. Dark spots and bright spots. Bright spots are the people who believe in inclusivity, human fraternity. They are among Hindus and Muslims and Christians and Jews and Buddhists. They are in every country. So our job, our goal in civic engagement and dialogue is to find those people and work with them. They are everywhere. We need to work with them. And when we reach enough people, it's going to be a bigger impact, bigger difference. Okay, if we just focus on, oh my God, how am I going to solve the Hindu-Muslim ethnic conflict in India? That's too depressing. Don't focus on that. Find the people who believe like you from different religions and faiths and work with them. I think your heart will tell you that this is the right thing to do and this is sufficient. Your responsibility is not to end the Muslim-Hindu conflict in India. Your responsibility is to reach out to people who want to eliminate and reduce that conflict, who want to set a good example. Setting a good example is so important. We want to set a good example with 50 people in the Dialogue Society program, that Muslims, Hindus, other faiths, they work together, they collaborate, they develop friendship, human fraternity. We set a good example. That is our goal.
Thank you. Imran, you can go next.
Hello, sir. I want to ask a very simple question, but I will come around to it in a way. So I want to take you back to your primary subject, that is computer science. Like I've recently written an MPhil on dialogue and I've somewhat tried to deal with it in different ways. So technically, when we look at dialogue, so like when the word or when the text is on page, there is just one way conversation which is there with a page, like a word written on a page. There is just one way conversation. Or for say that matter, even in a television, there is just one way communication. But when we come to computers, so there is two-way communication, like whether we are on a chat or whether like now how we are talking right now. So there is two-way dialogue happening. So I wanted to know what is the thing I wanted to know is it just two-way or there is a third element to it also in the form of mega companies like Meta and Twitter. What is their role in this whole process of dialogue? Is it just that they are facilitating dialogue, or they are also actively involved in the whole nitty-gritty politics of it? Like they are also influencing a lot of things in society. For example, Meta is accused of influencing riots in Africa. Or, for example, there is a psychological warfare which has been going on from Meta's side, where once I read that they are trying to push an agenda where they are telling this whole world that we constitute, that we live in, is the metaverse. So these are really very serious charges. So I wanted to know what is the role of these third parties like Meta and Twitter, and I wanted to know whatever conversation which we have online, is there some form of bookkeeping which is being done by these third parties, say it is the US or say it is whoever the service provider is there some bookkeeping of whatever conversation we do? I wanted to know these two things. Thank you.
When you say Meta, you're referring to the company that owns Facebook? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay. So you're talking about social media, basically. What is the role of the social media as a third party in dialogue? So that is a very good, excellent question. Experience shows, I think you have witnessed this yourselves as well, that other forms of interaction besides human-to-human interaction may not be as productive as human-to-human interaction, right? So social media, unfortunately, it looks like, it appears, I'm not familiar with the actual scientific studies of the impact of social media, but my impression based on my readings is that overall it has a more negative impact. I felt this first, I was studying at the early days of the web and the online forums before social media, before internet became so prevalent. So I was using internet before the web, let me put it that way. We were doing FTP and emails and other things and the forums, message forums. And I realized very early on that when people go onto a forum, it's almost like they cease to be a human and they become like robots. Then I realized that you say things or write things in a forum that you would not say into the face of another person. So one thing that helped me understand this was a word of Rumi. You probably heard about Rumi, the Sufi master who lived in Turkey, born in I think Uzbekistan now, or Afghanistan, some place like that. So Rumi says that when two human beings come together and talk to each other, it is actually two souls who look at each other through the window of the eye. Now, this is a simple sentence, but if you really think about it, it impacts you. When two human beings come together and look at each other, it is two souls that look at each other through the window of the eye. Now, do those two souls know their source, right? So I mentioned that we have a lot of labels. If I don't know you, if I don't come across you, you are just a label to me. You are a Muslim or a Hindu or Jew or Christian. You are an, Imran or, Yusuf or James to me, American Indian to me. But when we come together and look at each other, you are no longer labels. My soul recognizes your soul. and they recognize that we come from the same source. So there's something magical going on there. That is why our partner organization, we always try to facilitate human-to-human interaction whenever it's possible. So COVID period was very painful for us. Now Zoom is kind of in between social media and human-to-human interaction. So we try to take advantage of the Zoom like this. But social media is very challenging. So what do we do? I think there are multiple things to be done in social media. First of all, we should try to take advantage of it because we can reach more people. So again, out-of-box thinking, how to make something attractive with a positive message, how to make something attractive with a positive social interaction rather than hate mongering or others. One thing to do. Secondly, awakening people to the risks of social media. Third, working with government authorities and social groups, civic groups, to prevent hate mongering on social media, to hold people and companies accountable for what they are doing with social media. So there are so many things to be done. It is a fact of our lives. Overall, so far, its impact is not positive on the balance, but there are still some things that can be done. One thing that was observed in activism was that through social media, people are able to organize and do certain things. But observers, the researchers, observe that activism organized through social media is not very resilient. As it is formed quickly, it is likely to dissolve quickly. Whereas activism that is based on human-to-human interaction, like actual organizations that come together as persons, they are more resilient. So there is still advantage there. With more resilient networks, it is possible to make a difference in the social media networks. But it is a challenge. It's a big challenge. I'm not going to. I try to limit my exposure to social media. I don't have a Facebook account. I only have Twitter, which I use very infrequently. But for youth, it's a very different picture. They are growing through it. It's impossible to think without a world without social media. So we need to think out of the box and do work in multiple domains.
Mona Lisa had a
there was there was this another question. Is there some bookkeeping also which is going on, which goes on by the third parties of our conversation, whatever we do on? Is there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can count on it. They are keeping track of the dialogues and conversations in multiple places. So if there is something you can do about that, you should do that too. In Europe, you might be familiar. They pass laws where they have to get your consent for keeping certain information. That's an example of something that can be done. But there's absolutely bookkeeping that's going on at the company level, at the government level, probably at other third-party levels. So what can be done in that domain, that should be done too, absolutely.
Mona Lisa had a couple of questions in the chat. Mona Lisa, would you like to unmute yourself and ask?
So thank you. First, let me congratulate all of us who have the luxury of hearing your talk. Thank you, Dr. Yal. So I'm into neurosciences and behavioral sciences, and this is why it is so intriguing for me to be here in such thought-provoking sessions. So I was reading through the IATs, the kind of test where you have a simple list and you have to sort out the list. And that's a very interesting way where you have, actually everybody can go to Harvard, the site, I can share it in the group. And there is a IAT which is called the RACE IAT. And every time that you go there, you come and discover your own biases, your own conditioning. So to actually give, you need to have a cleaner water, or maybe the glass needs to be properly filled, if I may take a metaphorical thing about it, to actually give and contribute into having peace, having that kind of dialogue, having a better human experience instead of having nation-wide and citizen kind of an experience. What is it that we can do as a personalized intervention which is based on conditioning, especially when you spoke about the brain rewiring, reframing? So, is there any study that you would like to share to get a little more insight about it? That would be really kind of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, what we learned in the recent year is that the brain is very plastic, and every experience that we have actually physically changes our brain. So that means that nothing in the brain will go out easily, but it means that through work, it is possible to rewire and reverse those developments in the brain. Right? So, for instance, let's say I hear and learn about an ethnicity or religion in the media associated with something. Okay, so Muslims and violence, Hindus and violence, or I don't know, workers and rebellion, or business owners and greed, whatever association that we formed in our minds. So probably in and around Turkey, the neighbors of Turkey would see Turks as the violent, and the Turks see the Greeks as the guys who occupied part of Turkey. They are violent, so on and so forth. It's all around the world, but there are these associations. So these associations are in the form of two neural networks in our brain that are connected with each other. So I have a group or a person or entity associated with an adjective, and there are links, neural links between these neuron groups that is in our brain. And you cannot just simply cut those links. So what the researchers are suggesting is that we need to, if this is not reflecting reality, right? All X are not violent, obviously. All Y are not. It's a different picture. It's a diverse picture. So we need to get the true picture. So if this stereotype, if this association is not serving us, then we need to associate this neuron group with another concept. So, in the aftermath of 9/11 in America, so the associating Islam Muslims with violence was very prevalent. So the advice of the experts in this field was that, if you say Muslims are not violence, or violence is antithetical to Islam, this is not productive. You should say that in America there are millions of Muslims. Who are they? They are your doctors, they are your engineers, they are your firefighters, they are your teachers, they are your software developers, they are your therapists. There was recently a famous Muslim lady who was leading an effort for anti-COVID vaccination and other medical things. She was at a very high position helping Americans save their health. So she's a Muslim, right? So the approach is to make new connections. Okay, whatever stereotype or bias that you have that does not reflect reality, we should work on to make new connections. This is what I mean by outside of the box thinking. And this is the whole point of civic engagement and dialogue, that when you meet a person of a different religion, ethnicity, background, and you interact in a safe environment, in a meaningful, or you work together in a social responsibility project, now you're associating that group with somebody who cares, somebody who wants to make a contribution, somebody whom I can talk to, somebody who is a human. Okay, this is what we're trying to do. Make new connections in our brains and let the dysfunctional connections dissipate slowly through time.
Thank you. We have 3 more questions. One is from Mohammed Osama. You can go next.
Hello, Professor. First of all, thank you. And my question is that I can believe after the World War II, there is a global hatred against Muslims as a problem of, as like the problem of global warming. I don't know why one community is targeted across the globe for any kind of mishappening that has happened. And my second question is that as far as the media is concerned, or the third party, or whatever it is, Meta, Facebook, Twitter, any social media network, I kind of believe they are actually supporting when you raise your voice for Ukraine. We should support Ukrainian, but they kind of suppress your voice when you're going to support Palestinian. When you're going to support, you raise your voice for Kashmiris. So why is like that? I think that there is some power that they are actually trying to spread hate against Muslims. And I don't think this kind of lecture problem will help us to resolve these problems. When there is a superpower against trying to create a problem or havoc against one single community. Thank you.
Okay, the first part I'm not very clear. You mentioned, did you mention global warming? Like
no, sir. My question is that I can believe there is a problem of global warming, especially after the World War II. I can believe there is a problem against Muslims all over the world. There is a global rise in hatred against Muslims, especially everywhere. I'm a working professional. I face such problem. When you call your, when they call you my name, when they call my name Muhammad Osama, they just think I'm a terrorist. So it's the problem in India too. It's rise after 2014 when the new government elected, and it's not only in India; it's everywhere. So I think there is some superpower trying to create a atmosphere of hatred against Muslims.
Okay, so these large-scale events or perceptions that we have about them, again, to focus on them, I think is the wrong approach. The perception of or association of Islam with violence, it was not directly after World War II, as far as I can remember, but it was a more recent phenomenon in the 70s, 80s. It started in the 70s and 80s, 90s, and it reached the peak during the Afghanistan war and the Iraqi war. Obviously, the political agendas of the big powers play an important role in those. If there is a war going on, news media focuses on that. So the images that you get are from the war zone. And there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. Okay, how many of them are involved in those terrorist acts or wars? Not even 1%, not even 0.5%, not even 1 in 1,000, right? But the images that you get are completely covered by this. So the political actions of big powers and the coverage of this by the news media, unfortunately, impacts a large number of people. So that is the reality. We cannot deny that. But is that something that you can change? I can change? No. So we are just trying to focus on what we can change. If we are able to reach an influential American or Indian or Russian or British or German, if this influential person is making a significant move or action, then that is a success. So you might remember at some point during those years, Colin Powell was the Secretary of State, and then he resigned, and then he became, I don't know if he assumed the position, but Barack Obama was running for president, or he was already president. I don't remember exactly when he said this. And Barack Obama declared that he is a Christian, although he has a Muslim father. He declared himself as a Christian. He was going to a church. And Colin Powell said, when people said Barack Obama is a secret Muslim, he said, what if he is a Muslim? This is America. What if he is a Muslim? What's wrong with that? So for a person like Colin Powell to say that is important. And it did have an impact in America. So at that time in the 90s, early 2000s in America, Muslims had a very bad reputation, very bad association. But now it's not like that. Right now in America, in different places, there is a conscious effort to include Muslims. If you pick up magazines, in advertisements of clothing companies, you see Muslim ladies dressed in the hijab as models. In political arena, there are Muslim figures who are given microphone, who are given positions. President Biden appointed many Muslim figures into important positions. It is changing. So this did not happen overnight. Muslims in America worked year over year over year. They have been active in political campaigns. The intellectuals in America who don't believe in separatism and antagonism. They worked. There was a editor of the New Yorker magazine, which is very important in America because it has about 800,000, 1 million readership. They are all elites in America. They are influential. Many of them are influentials. So the editor of this magazine in a conference was speaking. He is Jewish. He was saying that at that time there was a potential lawsuit or investigation against the president at that time. I'm not going to mention any names. He said that I wish that if this investigation is successful and there is a penalty, that his tower, business tower, will be turned into a Muslim community center. This is what he said. So, you know, the Muslim perception in America is very different from the 90s today. But it didn't happen overnight. It happened through the works of individuals working consistently, resiliently over the years. So this is what is our job is. If we focus on the big picture and the big actors, we're going to lose our hope. We should focus on our domain.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yusuf has a question in the chat. Yusuf, can you unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah. Thank you, Professor, for giving a wonderful talk on the dialogue and how it can.
Thank you for being here.
So my question is in specific to Indian context, where you can see in the last 10-15 years, the hate and the fear of other is so much institutionalized in the system as well. Like if you see the government and you know, like the or we can call it as a policy paralyzers, or like how government agencies are countering with minorities and other marginalized section. It is not only with other faith only. Even within the Hindu community also there are like issues of caste and other issues. So my question is that in the practical sense, how can we intervene like as a civil society in a proactive way rather than cribbing and complaining about this? What can be done? Second thing is that in American case is quite different. For example, Muslim civil society in America is very strong. For example, the educated or middle class professionals, and even though, like you mentioned about ISNA and Zaytuna and a lot of global Muslim scholars working based in US. So especially a case in India where Muslims are so much in the double burden of the economic position as well, like it's so much underrepresentation at the government level and even the class perspective also, majority of the Muslims are falling under lower middle class position. So in that context, how as a community Muslims can engage with these, as you said, peace building and a dialogue initiation on other related process. Can you talk more on that from your American and Turkish experience?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. For the first part of the question, rather than complaining, being part of the solution. So that is the right way of looking at it. Rather than complaining about what's going wrong, can we be part of the solution? And again, this being part of the solution, we should not think in a monolithic way. We should be very flexible, and we should be considering all the options. Okay? There is a researcher, writer in America by the name of David Hawkins. And David Hawkins measures the level of consciousness among different people. He actually has a kinetic test, what they call the kinetic test, like when people lie, they're not as strong as opposed to when they tell the truth. So he measures, you know, what drives people at what level of consciousness. He has a scale of consciousness. So inclusivity, you know, living to let others live. So those are high levels of consciousness, as opposed to being just proud of something that you are in. That's in the middle, and at the lower levels there's despair, or there's you know, fear and violence. So what he's saying is that, in a society, number-wise, majority of the people are at low levels of consciousness. If you just look at the numbers, they are at low levels of consciousness. But there are individuals who are at a higher level of consciousness, and they have a higher impact. They have a higher influence as opposed to their numbers. As a voter, they are just one voter, or as a person, they are just one person. But they have a larger influence in the overall level of consciousness of the society. And that is the only explanation I can find to understand why countries are where they are today. Okay, if you were to come to America, go to Germany, go to some other place, and look at the overall state of the society where they came, and look at the people, sometimes you say, is it really these people who produce this society or this country? And you realize that it is not the majority of the people who are doing it. But it is certain individuals are much more conscious, and they are doing things, and in a sense they are like herding. I'm not as a sheep. I don't mean that, but influencing in subtle ways. Let's put it that way. Influencing the society in subtle ways to move them in a certain direction. So, for the larger political question, I think being part of the solution includes reaching out to individuals, reaching out to organizations, being part of organizations, organized action, and also reaching out to more conscious people in every party, in every group, and then collaborating with them or just nudging them to do something good as the next step, something good as the next step. And sometimes these efforts for being part of the solution, overall, they will fail, and the country will face a crisis. And that crisis will wake up more people. Unfortunately, sometimes that's the case. Okay. We hope and pray that that doesn't happen, but you can think that World War II was an example of that. The Germans were in a dream, and they were under the spell of Hitler. But in other countries, there was also a problem. They were also indifferent. Hitler occupied multiple countries. The European powers did not react strongly. They did not impose sanctions, or they did not react strongly. Only when Germany went into Poland, finally, other countries declared war. Right? So there was a problem in other countries. United States did not join the war for a long time, although they were aware of all of the atrocities and the dangers. Right? So the World War II was a wake-up call for the majority of humanity, or a significant portion of humanity. Sometimes it takes a crisis to wake up people. So our aim is to be part of the solution in different ways, so that it doesn't take a crisis to wake up. And we should not expect the majority of the people to rise to a high level of consciousness. We should accept the fact that the majority will remain around the middle or a little below the middle. But who are the people with higher levels of consciousness? Reach out to them, collaborate with them. Now, in the US versus India situation, I have been here for 30 years, and you have a high image of the American Muslim population. I'm afraid that's not the reality. The American Muslim population, yes, they are in a much better shape than 30 years ago, but they have come a long way, and they have not been economically or otherwise powerful. Numerically, they are only in the 1 or 2 million range, so they are even less than 1% of the population. So essentially, except for Michigan and maybe one other place, there are only 1 or 2 places where Muslim votes actually count for majority or significant. Like in Michigan, Detroit area, there is one county there where Muslim votes are significant, and then maybe there's one more place or maybe 2 other places. In no other county, Muslim votes are significant. A politician can simply ignore them. So it is something else. It is not just numbers. It is a consistent, conscious effort over the years, combined with non-Muslim intellectuals, conscious people collaborating with Muslims. So if President Biden today were not to give any positions to Muslims in government, this would not cause him any significant problem. It's not going to change the arithmetics of the election. It is consciousness on the Biden administration to give Muslims a voice, a place, a status. So it is the combination of sustained effort, knowing where you're going, resilience, not focusing on the big negatives, focusing on your work, and then the combination, collaboration with people who are different from you. This combination resulted in what we have today. In history, there are examples like this. You might have heard of Thich Nhat Hanh, this Buddhist leader who passed away recently. He lived in Vietnam throughout the war, or a big part of the war. He lived in Vietnam. Can you imagine his pain? On the one hand, there is the communists. On the other hand, the Americans, they are bombing, and the communists are also bombing or fighting. You know, there's violence on both sides, and Vietnamese people are dying year after year after year after year. Can you imagine his situation? How did he survive? But he survived. He continued his work. At some point, he could not come back to Vietnam because his advocacy against the war was not liked by the Vietnamese authorities and probably America too. But he continued. He lobbied Martin Luther King. He lobbied the United Nations. He continued his work. And before he died, he had millions of followers from America, from Europe, from France. They established a center, spiritual center in France and in America, in other countries. And he influenced millions of people. And Vietnam now has a much better relationship with America. They don't have violence in the country anymore. They have a lot of problems, obviously. No country is free from, but it is such a different picture. Why did this happen? Because Vietnam decided that China is now a threat, so they need to approach America. So the country is changing, the relationships are changing. But if you lived through the Vietnam War and only focused on the war, you could lose hope and you might consider suicide, or you might consider just giving up and going to another country. But he kept working in the spiritual domain for years and years, and he influenced millions of people. So I think, you know, we should look at such examples: consistency, resiliency. Don't focus on the bigger negative picture. Focus on your work. I think I need to ask permission to stop here. I also don't want you to, you know, exceed our boundaries here in terms of your timing. But maybe I can save and try to respond to your other questions in the chat. If you can kindly maybe send me the questions that were not answered, I will be happy to try to attempt to answer them.
I think all questions are answered. Just Ayanda had a comment in the chat in that we can just read. And Wazir had raised his hand, so maybe Wazir can just email. I'm not sure whether he lowered his hand. So thank you, Dr. Alp. It was a pleasure having you, and it was very insightful, especially the part of the brain scan always intrigued me that, you know, we can calculate these things and we know for sure that the dialogue works and, you know, peace building works. So
let's do little things with great passion. That's I guess that's my message, because we know that at least at the individual level it works.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Alp.
All right, thank you for giving me this time and opportunity, and I wish the best for you in your lives, in your careers, for India also, and other countries.